your company survive without creativity? What about your career? Do you have original ideas that work? Today's global marketplace is dynamic and hyper-competitive. Organizations must constantly innovate, producing unending lines of better products and services. Business creativity is now a necessity. But why are both creativity and innovation important? Creativity alone can be aimless, shooting off in all directions, while innovation alone can be sterile, producing nothing really new. So how can organizations be both creative and innovative? And what can we do to bring imagination and productivity to our jobs? Next, on Closer to Truth, how does creativity work at work? Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm Robert Kuhn. Creativity is no longer restricted to artists and actors. If the process can be focused, creativity really helps build companies and promotes careers. We've assembled a fascinating group of experts. 3 have actually run large creative organizations to explain how ideas and implementation must work together. Ray Kurzweil is an author, inventor, and entrepreneur who founded and managed 4 technology companies. Dr. John Kao, a psychiatrist and entrepreneur, is president of the Idea Factory, which specializes in corporate creativity. Dr. Robert Freeman has been chief executive of 2 leading music schools, Eastman and the New England Conservatory. Stephen J. Cannell, a prolific writer of television shows and novels, owned and managed one of the largest production studios in Hollywood. And Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is a professor of psychology and the author of important books about creativity. Ray, you have started, built, and managed 5 remarkable companies. It's hard to keep track. How do you encourage and inspire your employees to be creative?
Well, take speech recognition. Technology today is very interdisciplinary. We needed experts in signal processing, speech science, linguistics, and probably a half a dozen other disciplines. So the first thing we do is get everybody together, and we want everybody to understand all of these different disciplines. And we really want to think as a group, so it's not clear who came up with the idea. And then I found a very interesting technique is to give a signal processing problem to the linguists, where it's a completely different discipline, and let them use completely different tools and traditions to apply to a problem that they've never dealt with before. And you come up with very, very creative ideas that really do think out of the box.
And the person who is sitting over that, oftentimes yourself, has to be familiar with each of those disciplines?
Well, you do need one person that has the vision of what's feasible, and it's important to catch the wave at the right time. Technology has to be feasible but ahead of the edge. You have to aim at something that's going to be an advance when the product comes out, which might be 2 years later. And you have to really think about where technology will be.
John, what's an idea factory?
Well, in a general sense, an idea factory is any organization whose central idea in terms of being competitive has to do with creativity, originality, flexibility, the ability to have foresight into the future. I think all businesses want and need creativity, but the issue is that for many of them, going from the headline or the platitudes or the slogans around creativity to the actual daily practice, which involves people, money, opportunities, technology, and a whole bunch of very concrete factors, is very, very difficult to do. So the Idea Factory is actually a place, a setting, where creativity can happen every day.
And is that something more easily done in one kind of company, a technology company, say, than a distribution company?
I think the only kind of company these days that doesn't need creativity is one that doesn't need to change and that doesn't really need to have an eye on a rapidly changing external environment. So I'd say that'd be no companies.
Bob, you've been chief executive of 2 of the world's leading music schools, the Eastman School of Music and the New England Conservatory. What's it like running an organization overflowing with creative artists, all of whom think that they are something special?
Each of those creative artists is going to have a fairly narrow area of professional disciplinary focus. The bassoon teacher is going to have to want to make bassoon reeds. The historical musicologist is going to have to want to deal with watermarks and manuscripts from J.S. Bach. And the piano teacher is going to want to play Chopin etudes. If you put out on the table $75,000 or $100,000 a year out of an operating budget of, say, $20 million, and say that you're going to allocate that to projects that stem from the willingness of the aforementioned people and their colleagues to work together, you will get a rush towards the center and some pretty creative ideas.
What's an example of that?
People who are concerned about the relationship of the future of supply and demand, for example, for classically trained musicians. As soon as you get musicians thinking about that, they will come to the conclusion that there are probably too many pianists already, given the demand for the pianists. But that's only the case if you're sending out the best 5 of them from New York City all over the country. If you can put each of 20,000 in a different small town in America and get each of them to develop the musical life of that community on a pretty high level, you get a wholly different paradigm.
I think I'm hearing your creativity in that. We'll get back to that. Steve, you've built your private company, Stephen J. Cannell Productions, into the 3rd largest television studio in Hollywood. Remarkable. You produced 1,000 hours of network television, shows like Wise Guy, Silk Stockings. What's it like running a television studio, particularly since you're a writer and you have to manage other writers?
Well, it's an interesting dilemma, because as a writer I have tremendous pride of authorship, which you have to have as a writer, and yet as a company executive and a company that has 1,500 employees, a good percentage of which are creative people, you have to do a whole nother thing, which is you have to be a referee. You have to learn how to keep people working together. You're going to have a lot of high-octane people that can get sideways with one another. And your job, in order to keep everything moving forward, is you have to subjugate yourself. One of the things that I always say to people when they come in is that because my name's on the building doesn't mean I'm the smartest guy in the building. I may well not be. And what I want is, if I have a bad idea, I want you to tell me.
Do they?
Oh boy, if they don't, I will pull people aside if I feel they're just putting Vaseline on me, and I'll say, hey, you know what, you're not doing me any good. I need to know when I'm not thinking straight. I need to know, because I make creative mistakes just like anybody else in the business. So I want to know that. The result of it is, if the best idea wins in a creative environment, if you say the idea that wins is going to be the best idea, not the idea that comes from the biggest title, then what ends up happening is everybody feels part of it.
Mike, you've interviewed hundreds of creative people from all walks of life. You've heard quickly the stories of Ray's technology companies, Bob's music schools, Steve's television studios. What do you think of these guys?
Well, it seems to me that when we think about creativity in organizations, we think about how to generate more and more new ideas from as many people as possible in the organization. I think that's not where the real issue is, though. I think the problem with implementing creativity is selecting and encouraging and then realizing the good ideas. There are lots of good ideas out there, but where we don't do a very good job is knowing how to select and encourage the ones that are good. And I think I hear that from everyone, that you being heads of creative organizations, you know how to do that. But in many organizations, they don't. They hire psychologists to get the workers on the line to think out of the box and so forth. And they increase the number of new ideas, but they don't know how to select now out of those ideas the good ones. And so I think we have to think more about the selection aspect and the implementation rather than just the originality.
Right?
Well, a key issue on creativity in a group process is really defining what you're trying to create.